Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jackie Rowe, and I'm one of the marketing managers here at Cisco Meraki. And today we have quite an exciting webinar coming towards you. It's how your switch should do more than just switch. Seems like a pretty fundamental question in my opinion, but today we're going to dive into some possibilities and answers to how you can accomplish just that. Now, while we wait for the last few people to join the webinar today, I want to take a quick moment to look at the agenda. We're first going to start off with an introduction to cloud networking and cloud managed IT for those of you who might not be too familiar with the company or the product portfolio that we have. Then we're going to start and jump right into it, and we're going to build a switch fabric from the ground up. Then we're going to take a look at some different troubleshooting scenarios that you might run into on a hopefully not daily basis, but possibly daily basis. We're going to wrap everything up by taking a look at the product families. And then I do have a couple colleagues here who are supporting me in terms of Q&A. So if you have any questions, there's no need to wait until the end of the webinar. Just go ahead and type them into the Q&A or the chat box of WebEx, and I'll be periodically taking a look at those and answering them out loud for the group. Now, a quick note on maintenance. Everybody on this webinar is automatically muted, and that's just so that we can get through as much content as possible. But like I said, you most definitely can type any of your questions into the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be looking at them as a group together. I'm also pleased to announce that for all the qualified IT professionals in attendance today, we will be giving out a free 8-port PoE switch. This device is yours to keep. It also comes with a 3-year cloud management license. So essentially what we want to do today is show you some of the things that are possible with the switching portfolio at Meraki, and then give you a switch so that you can try it out yourselves. We don't want it back. It's yours to keep. We essentially just want you to try out all the features and the functionalities. Now, if you're curious about your eligibility details, they're laid out quite clearly at meraki.cisco.com/free switch, so you can take a look there. And in order to collect that device, we do need to confirm your shipping information before we can send this device out to you. And the reason we need to do that is because we want to make sure that we're shipping the switch to you and not to a random street corner somewhere. So if you can find your representative's contact details in the reminder email for today's webinar, you can reach out to them that way. You can also go to meraki.cisco.com/contact, and some of you might already have been in contact with your Meraki representative. So many ways to get that free device. I'll cover that again at the end of the webinar, so if you missed it just now, we will cover it again later. But ultimately, the takeaway is you need to get in touch with your Meraki representative to confirm your shipping information in order to get that free switch. Wonderful. All right, let's jump right in. A little bit about Meraki, who we are and what we do. We are a 100% cloud-managed IT company. So what does that really mean? Well, if you take a look at the left-hand graphic there, we have 6 main product portfolios. We have our wireless access points, indoor and outdoor models, 802.11 AC Wave 2 devices. We have our security appliances. These are UTM, so Unified Threat Management devices. They do the job of about 6 different devices all in one nice little sleek box. We have the switches that we're going to be talking about today, both access as well as aggregation switches. We have our communications portfolio, we have our enterprise mobility management platform, and the latest addition are the security cameras. Now, all 6 of these product lines are in constant communication with the cloud, which is doing the heavy lifting of monitoring and managing all that complex information, and then giving it to you in a very easy to understand way in Dashboard. Now, Dashboard is your browser-based management tool. So wherever you are in the world, whether you have access to your laptop, a desktop, your mobile phone, or whatever it is, you can go to dashboard.meraki.com or open up your application on your device and start monitoring, managing, configuring your network from no matter where you are in the world. So it gives you that deep visibility, that flexibility, and that remote management. Now, Meraki is a leader in cloud-managed networking, and we are among Cisco's fastest-growing portfolios. And we have over 200,000 unique customers, and that number is growing very rapidly. In fact, I'm fairly certain that that number is quite out of date at this point. And we have millions of devices online and connecting to the Meraki network, in fact. So no matter what type of industry you're in, this can be an ideal solution for you. So whether it's retail, hospitality, manufacturing, professional services, education, healthcare, government, construction, the list goes on and on. We have a wide variety of different customers in those different industries, which is a great point that I want to make. If you want to find out about any of these customer stories, we have an entire section of our website dedicated to that at meraki.cisco.com/customers. Take a look at some of their stories, and if you'd like to find a reference customer in your area or in your industry, just reach out to your Meraki representative and they can happily put you in touch with those people. So let's talk really quickly about simplifying IT with cloud management. At the end of the day, it's very easy to deploy, to manage, and to maintain. So you can pre-configure your network equipment before it ever arrives on site. You can scale very quickly without any type of bottlenecks. And you can manage your network from anywhere, like I mentioned, with that web-based dashboard or the app. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, you have full visibility and control over every aspect of your network. Now, this is a completely out-of-band solution, so no end-user information is actually passing through the cloud. Only monitoring and management data passes to the cloud. Everything else goes over the LAN or across the WAN. Now, we do have data centers around the globe, including 3 right here in Europe, and those are in Frankfurt, Munich, and Dublin. Now, what that means for you as a European customer is that your information, when you first first create a Meraki organization, you simply choose that you're going to be part of the EMEA region, and your data stays right here in one of those 3 European data centers. It does not go traipsing around the world, and it is compliant with EU privacy laws. Now, one question that I keep getting with Brexit, especially now that Brexit talks are actually moving forward a little bit further, what happens with our data then? Well, as of right now, England has opted to continue following EU privacy laws, so no changes necessary yet. If that changes in the future, we will take that on board and make updates as needed. We do run third-party security audits as well as daily penetration tests to ensure ongoing security. And we have an entire section of our website dedicated to reliability, scalability, security, data centers, etc. at meraki.cisco.com/trust. So if you have any questions, check out that website. Also, feel free to ask your representative any questions that you might have. All right, let's get into this. You have to bear with me a little bit on this demo. I want to get this out here in advance. My network that we're going to be building today is not actually in the building that I'm sitting in right now. So we're going to be a little bit nerve-wracking initially, but essentially it should go quite well given the fact that I did check on it, but I just need to throw that little caveat in there. The equipment is not in this building. It's in the city, but nowhere within my current reach. So the situation for today, let me just lay the ground real quick, is that we had the hypothetical situation. A CTO has signed a purchase order for equipment. That equipment was then sent off to the site. Some people at the site randomly plugged it in. True story. And I have just now been given the serial number and the order number for those devices. So the situation is this. The devices are on site. They are plugged in, but they are not configured, and I have not seen anything about these devices yet until the serial number and the order number that I just got in my inbox. That's where we are. I have it in a spreadsheet just so it's a little bit easier to access. But that is what we're dealing with today. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump right in. So I'm going to go ahead and share my Chrome window with everybody. Now, before we started today's webinar, and the reason I started about a minute late is I was actually logging into my dashboard, dashboard.meraki.com. I entered in my username and credentials. I went through 2-factor authentication. I happen to use Google Authenticator, but you get the point. So we have our devices. They're deployed here in London, where I'm speaking to you from today. Don't let the accent fool you. I promise you I live here. And we can zoom into this location, and we can see that we have some things that are not actually at our location, but that's okay. So we have this nice office there, and we have these devices and these networks within our larger organization. I'm just going to go ahead and click into this Ikarim London network, and I'm taken to this overview page here. And what I want to start with is first highlighting the fact that we do have a security appliance that we've already set up. So the security appliance is plugged in. I can see it here. I've added this one to my network. I did get this serial number in advance. So I have the security appliance plugged in. We can see that it has internet connection. That's a big thumbs up. It's going to make today go a lot smoother that we have internet access, because hopefully it means that we'll be able to see the other devices. So that's the device. I have not so cleverly named it breakfast. I was quite hungry when I named my network today. And we are going to go ahead and come down here to the inventory. And I actually just realized, let's just jump back here and select these. And let's actually truly start from scratch here, because there we go. All right, so coming over here onto the inventory section, when you first start with Meraki, you're simply going to come to a site like this that says inventory. Now, with this inventory page here, you can come over here and either download as a CSV any of the devices that you already have imported into your network, or you can claim devices. So I'm going to go ahead and claim some devices here. So here it says you can enter your serial number or your order number, one per row, into this little box here. So I'm just going to go ahead and move over to an Excel window. Now in Excel, I already have my serial numbers here, and I have an access point that I'm also going to add in. And then I have the overall order number as well, but I'm just going to use the serial numbers for these devices. So I'm just going to copy those, come over here, chuck them in this little box. I'm going to go ahead and add my access point as well, just for fun, so that we have that in here. And then I'm going to claim these devices. So now I have these devices. We can see them in this list here. I can see the type of devices that they are. As you will notice here, the model is one of our older models, but that's what I get. It still works just fine. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and claim these switches. So I'm going to select those 4 switches that we have here. I'll come back, and I'll go ahead and claim the AP as well. Claim these 4 new devices, and then I'm going to add them to a network. And we've already created this ICRIM London network because I already had our security appliance there. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on Add to Existing. Now it's going to then update here, and I can see that each of these devices is now part of a network. And what I can do is come back here to, let's just refresh this page. And now I'm going to go over here to the switches page and take a look at the list of switches that we have. So here are the 4 switches that I've just added in. This is a huge sigh of relief. They are all green and connected, which is great. So the devices are online, they are plugged in, and they are connected to the network. That's brilliant. That's going to make today's webinar go a lot smoother. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to click in, just for the sake of making this a little bit easier on ourselves, and name these switches. Keeping in line with the breakfast theme, let's call this one eggs. Save that one. Go on to the next switch. Bacon. Anybody else have recommendations? Let's see. Go on to the next one. We'll name this one coffee. Everyone needs a little coffee in their lives. And then, sorry, I was a little late to that coffee suggestion. Beans. Perfect. Thank you, Aiden. We'll call it beans, or beans and cheese, since I just got that example as well. And we'll name it like I just saw it. So beans and cheese with the Z. Sorry, the Z. So there we go. If we come back to the list now, we have eggs, coffee, beans, and cheese. You can't use ampersand, right? And then bacon. So we have our 4 switches here. I've named them only to make our lives a little bit easier so we can actually identify them outside of just their serial number as we go through. So that is quite good. Now, as I mentioned, these devices are in another site, and my first concern here is a little bit of security, a little bit of power savings. We don't need these devices to be utilized during the evening hours, and so what we're going to do is the first order of business is I'm going to start setting some configurations. Now, some of these configurations we just set at a network level, but then we actually will add them on a per port basis. So bear with me as we go through this. The first thing, like I said, I want to do is set up a port schedule. So I only want some of these ports to actually be accessed during the daytime hours when I know somebody is there. Because let's face it, if somebody is trying to plug into one of these ports during the off hours, that's a bit concerning because I don't know what they're trying to do on the network. And this location that the devices are in is actually a temporary office for us. And so it's still in construction. And so it is a secure site, but we don't have people sitting there 24 hours by any means. So we're going to add a port schedule. Click on that, and we're going to call this lockdown. And so what we're going to do here is say, I'm going to use one of these templates here and say weekdays only from 8 to 5. So if I select this template, what we're going to do here is narrow down this bandwidth of use, or sorry, this band of usage from 8 in the morning until 5 p.m. Now on Tuesdays, I'm going to push that back to 6, and on Wednesdays, I'm going to push that up until 7 in the morning. And then on Friday, let's face it, everyone leaves early, so push that to 4. So there we go. We have a schedule. So these ports, when this schedule is applied on a per port basis, these ports are only going to be enabled during those green hours. So that's great. Let's go ahead and save those changes. So we have a port schedule. It's right there. We can see here it's used by 0 ports. We'll add that to ports a little bit later on. Now, the next thing that I want to do is add another layer of security. So I'm going to call this one Lockdown Schedule. And then I'm going to come over here to our access policies. Now, access policies are essentially wired authentication. So what we're going to do here is, I know for a fact that a couple of guys have actually plugged a PoE phone or VoIP phone into some of these switches. And I know that to power a VoIP phone, obviously you have an Ethernet cable that's plugged into that phone, right? Well, there's not much stopping people from unplugging the Ethernet cable from that phone and plugging it into their own computer and starting to access the network. And that raises all kinds of little red flags in my head. So what we're going to do here is add an access policy. So what we're going to do is name this Lockdown Access Policy, or Lockdown Access. There we go, I can type. And now what we're going to do is say, all right, if you unplug that Ethernet cable from the phone and plug it into your own device, that's great, but we're going to ask you for your username and password. So we're going to tie this with a Radius server. So I'm going to come down here and add a Radius server, and let's just type this in here. And this is just going to allow us to make sure that random strangers or random people aren't accessing, let's see if I can type and think at the same time, accessing the network without our approval. Now we're going to go ahead and enable radius testing, which is helpful, and then we're going to choose what kind of access policy you want. So I'm going to use 802.1x down here, but you can choose hybrid or MAC-based authentication. And then we have a guest VLAN here. Now what we're going to do is, if somebody does not have a username and password, we're going to dump them into our guest VLAN, which is a VLAN 20. And say that, let's say you can still access the network, but you're not going to be able to access any of our confidential information. So our guest network is a bit more locked down. And then I know that all of our clients, all of our VoIP clients over there are more modern devices, so I don't mind having this authentication on those devices themselves. But in the instance that you might have a legacy VoIP client where you cannot type in a username and password, you can actually bypass that authentication if needed. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it on. So require authentication. Let's save that change. There we go. So now we have access policy, a lockdown access policy. So far we have set a port schedule, we've created a port schedule, and we've created a radius authentication policy for different ports. So we still haven't applied them anywhere yet, but they are ready to go for when we get to that point. So let's go ahead and set some rules to optimize that voice traffic, because we've just talked about it. Let's actually optimize it. So what I'm going to do is come over here, and instead of clicking on the switches, so that's a full list of the switches, I'm going to come down here to our switch ports page. And this is what we call virtual stacking. So we have four switches. Each of them have about 24 ports. And so if I know that I want the same ports to be configured the same way on all of my switches, I want to save myself a little bit of time, because I don't want to have to sit there and parse through all of these different ports and reconfigure every single new switch. That just takes a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and actually just sort this on our ports. There we go. So we have bacon, beans, cheese, and all the ports, coffee, and eggs. So we have all of our different devices here. Now what I'm going to do is I want to come over here and look at this CDP LLDP information. I want to take a look at which ports are currently in use. So if I scroll down this list here, we can see links to different switches. That's great. Somebody on site actually plugged the switches together, so we have them daisy chained. And then that's another daisy chained. That's an AP, so let's keep an eye on that one. So that's on port 5. It's good to know. And then here we have ports 8 and 10 have a phone plugged into them. So that's quite a good thing to notice. So what I'm going to do is, I said, what was it? Port 5 had the AP. So let's do ports 1 through 5. We will configure that for access point clients. And we will configure ports, let's say, 6 through 20 for our telephones, so for our voice clients. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick on this one here. We're going to choose eggs. This is the main switch that we're going to work on today. So let's go ahead and choose those initial ports. So ports 1 through 5, let's pick those ones. And then we're going to click this button up here that says Edit. So I'm going to edit this, and the first thing I want to do is tag it so I remember what I'm doing here. So these are going to be access points. So we'll add that as a tag. That way my little brain doesn't forget what I'm doing here. We're enabling these ports. That's great. what we're going to do now is actually enable one of those port schedules. So this is that lockdown port schedule that we just configured a second ago. So again, I don't really want these ports to be active during the off hours, so I'm going to add that one there. I'm going to change the type here from trunk to access. And then here, all of a sudden, we have this access policy pop up. And that access policy, there's that lockdown access policy that we saw. So what we're going to do is go ahead and choose that access policy. And then come up here and we will go ahead and set that up. I'm going to change that, that VLAN because this is not voice clients. So let's remove that. And I think that is all I want to do for now. So, okay, let's go ahead and update those 5 ports. So we're saving that. So now, if we look at the top here, we have the schedule, the access policy. So those 2 columns, and we can see on those 5 ports, we now have a lockdown schedule and a lockdown access policy, and we have tagged them as access points. Great. Let's now take ports 6 through 20, and we'll do the same thing, except these now have those telephones on them, right? So we're going to click on Edit once again. We're going to come down here, change this from trunk to access. We will go ahead and change that to our voice VLAN, which is 30. And then we are going to, once again, enable that port schedule. And we'll use the tag here as VoIP. And let's see, I think that might be all I want to do there. All right, so we have that done. We have our VLAN as 1, which is our corporate VLAN. Yep, let's go ahead and update that. Perfect. Cool, so now we have ports 1 through 20 configured. I'm not going to bother with these last set of ports here. I'm just going to leave them as is. But we have these 20 ports now configured, but that's all on one switch, right? So, and we still have a few other things that I want to do. So I'm going to go ahead and come up here to the top, and I'm going to search on is access because I want to see all of our access ports. So these are all the ones that is configured to access. I'm going to hit them, and there is one thing I forgot to do, which I want to show you right now, and that's protecting against non-authorized switches. So essentially, I don't want somebody walking in and plugging their own switch into one of my ports and start servicing unprotected clients that way. So I'm going to hit Edit and come down here to STP guard and add in BPDU guard. So there we go. We're going to add that layer of security in there so that it's going to deny other users from plugging devices into our switch ports and starting to service other clients. Okay, I think that was the majority of the things I wanted to do in terms of per port configuration. So let's get rid of this search there. Now, what I want to do is, if we scroll down to the bottom of the page here, we have eggs, which is the switch that we just took a look at. We were just taking a moment to configure, right? So we have voice VLAN set up for our VoIP clients. We have VoIP clients tagged as VoIP. And then we have the lockdown policy as well as any type of policy here. I just realized I forgot to add that lockdown policy on our voice clients. I'm already missing things, guys. This is not a good start. All right, so 6 through 20, and let's click on Edit and then add that access policy. So lockdown access policy, we'll update that. Perfect. And now all the other ports, like I said, I'm just going to leave them as is for right now. So great, we have those 20 ports configured on one switch. The problem is we have 3 more switches. Well, let's go ahead and come back up here to our switches. And so we just configured eggs. So this is the one we just configured here. If I click into it, we can see ports that are currently in use. We can come down here, and it's quite funny. We have port not forwarding traffic due to access policy, which is fantastic. If we come up here to ports, we can see, again, on a per port basis, what's going on here. Also, when we click into these switches, we can take a look at the power supplies. So we have hot swappable power supplies on our switches. We can take a look at any layer 3 routing tables. We can look at an event log here, so we can see exactly what's been going on at what time. We can see a location as well as have live tools. Now we'll get to these live tools a little bit later when we talk about troubleshooting, but I do want to highlight that that's here. So that is a switch. That's eggs. That's the one that we just configured. That was quite simple, I think. And so what we're going to do now is, instead of taking another, 5 or so minutes, because I think that's about what it took, is 5 minutes once we started configuring the ports. possibly 10 if we want to be risky. Well, I don't want to spend another 5 to 10 minutes sitting here configuring each other switch. So I'm going to simply select those 3 switches that I'm not done yet and click on Edit. And I'm going to hit on Clone. And I want to say I want to configure the switches exactly like eggs. That's the one that we just configured, right? So click on Clone. And I have a nice little thing here that says switches are successfully cloned. Perfect. So everything looks the same on this page, to be honest. So let's come back over here to our switch ports page. This is where we can see exactly what's going on with all of our ports. So now here we have Bacon at the top, and sure enough, Bacon has the tags, the schedules, and the access policies. Beans and cheese, same thing. Coffee, same thing. Great, so we're doing quite well for ourselves. So now we have each of these switches perfectly configured the way we want them to. So 4 switches configured in less than 10 minutes. I'd say that's pretty good. So now let's talk a little bit more about optimizing our deployment. So we have the basic configurations done. Let's come over here to Switch and go down here to Switch Settings. Here you can set a management VLAN, you can enable spanning tree, set quality of service rules, things like that. So we're going to do a few of those things. First, we're going to enable rapid spanning tree. You can set the bridge priority if you want to. So let's go ahead and click on that. We're going to choose the switch, so we'll choose coffee. And you can set up your bridge priority as you need it, but that's it. Then down here, we can set a quality of service rule. So I'm going to set our voice VLAN, which is 30. Set that up. You can choose your protocol. And then set the DSCP traffic to a certain class of service mapping. Or, you know what, I already have it tagged, so I'm simply going to trust that incoming DSCP tag. But that's it. That's as easy as it is. Click Save. And now we have set up rapid spanning tree as well as a quality of service rule. Very, very simple to do. Job done. Now, the next thing that I want to highlight is the fact that you can lock down your DHCP. So all of our switches perform DHCP snooping. We want to protect against rogue DHCP servers where someone can plug an AP into a wall jack because they want wireless. Well, now they've begun issuing DHCP leases. So what you can do very easily, in here is set up rules that will actually prevent that. So very, very simple to do that. You can simply add the interfaces and the static routes depending on what your needs are. Now, the next thing that I want to do in terms of configuration for our devices, and it's kind of one of the last things I want to do, is come back up here to our switches. Now, we have 4 switches, and the network that we have this site is actually really important that it stays up always. So what we're going to do is set a warm spare. So I'm going to come up here to eggs. We're just calling eggs our primary switch now, just because I love eggs. And if I scroll down here on the sidebar, we see something called warm spare. So I can click on configure warm spare, enable that, and then choose which of the other 3 switches I want to be the warm spare. So what this is going to mean is that during normal operation, both of these switches are online, both are responding to layer 2 traffic, but they're sharing a virtual IP address. Now, if the primary switch, eggs, should go offline for whatever reason, become unresponsive, then our beans and cheese switch is then immediately going to take over the layer 3 responsibilities. So I can click on update, confirm that, and now we have our spare, which is beans and cheese. It's that easy to do. So now we have configured on a per port basis 4 different switches. We've set up quality of service rules, and we've set up a warm spare. And it's only 30 minutes into the webinar so far, and let's face it, I spent the first, 10 or so minutes kind of talking about a little bit marketing fluff, right? So that's not too shabby in my personal opinion. So let's go ahead, and I want to move back to our slides because there's a few other things I want to highlight here. So we've configured the actual devices. Let's talk a little bit about troubleshooting. So we have a user, for example, that's unable to access the internet. So an end user is called into the help desk saying they cannot browse the internet. What do I do? Well, the help desk employee files a ticket with IT to report the issue. Well, that's a really vague request, right? So what we can do is jump back here. And what I'm going to do is, just for the sake of today's argument, I want to log out of this network because I want to actually show you the larger Meraki network. And the reason I want to do that is simply because we have a lot more traffic passing through that network, and it's a bit more interesting to look at for these troubleshooting scenarios. So bear with me as I migrate from the network that we just built over here to our Meraki corporate network. Now I'm going to be taking a look at our San Francisco headquarters, so still doing this very remotely, in fact, halfway across the world remotely. And I do see a lot of questions that are coming in, so I will get to those in just a minute. But bear with me, I'll get through this first troubleshooting scenario and then move on from there. So the first thing I'm doing here is jumping into our client page. This is a full list of all the client devices that we have within our organization. We have both wired and wireless clients here. We can search on a client name or an operating system or a tag or whatever the case might be. So for example, if George has raised an IT ticket saying, oh, I can't connect to the internet, what I can do is click into George's device, so this is the channel test laptop, and say, you know what, sure enough, the last time they were seen was yesterday, sorry. Let's investigate what's going on here. And so I can see which SSID they used to log in, which access point they last connected to, and a lot of other great information here. And I can click into the access point itself, and maybe what we're seeing here is a situation where a port, so maybe the port that this particular device is plugged into, so here let's jump up to port 47, for example. On this switch, maybe there is an access policy that the user is violating, or maybe there's a port schedule. So if we think about port schedules, you remember I set a port schedule here in London for the hours of, 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. about. Well, let's hypothetically say that this switch is also sitting here in, or this switch is, that port schedule, is configured on this switch, which is sitting in San Francisco. Well, it is about, I don't know, 8:30 in the morning in San Francisco right now. And let's hypothetically say that port schedule is for 9 a.m. Well, that user won't be able to log into the network then because they're violating that port policy. But what you can do here very easily is drill down, and that's the point that I want to make. You can drill down from a port to the device that's actually plugged into that port using that CDP, LLDP information. And then you can drill down into the clients that have been connecting to that device. So there's that channel test laptop again. You can drill all the way down into that client and start investigating from the client all the way up through the switch to identify that particular issue. All right, there are some other questions that are coming in, so bear with me here. And yes, there's a good point. I did say England when I was talking about Brexit, but yes, it is all of the UK. That was a slip up on my part. So the change that I made earlier was blocking other switches from plugging into our switch. So that was BPDU guard. So that essentially just locks down the switch ports from servicing other switches out there. The switches that I'm using are layer 3 switches. Great question here. So how can one switch actually be the backup or the warm spare for the other? Are they both connected to the internet? Yes, so that they are both connected to the internet. You can have them connected at different layers in the network, but it's a very simple thing to set that up. Do we have a diagram to see how the switches are connected? I am so happy you've asked that question. I'm going to click on this topology page here, and while this topology page is loading, I'm going to answer a couple other questions. I'm going to come back to that one. I thought an MX device always needs to be on site. This webinar seems to only have switches. Yes, so the situation here is that the MX, or the security appliance, was already plugged in there, and I simply added switches to that device, or to that network. So the idea here was that somebody on site has plugged them in, but I don't know how they plugged them in. I don't know what's configured or what's not configured. So they were daisy chained from a security appliance. Great question. Is daisy chaining a normal way to stack the switches? It's another great question. You can either do it daisy chained, you can physically stack the switches. You can also have standalone switches that are virtually stacked using that per port configuration tool. I see a question about how much power do these consume. I'm going to come back to that one. Okay, so this is the topology page. This is a real-time network diagram. I'm going to collapse this down just so it's easier to see here. But this shows you exactly how your entire network is interconnected. So this grouping here, this is a group of physically stacked switches. And then you can see all of the devices that are then plugged into that stack. So these happen to be a bunch of phones. From here into this stack, we have a bunch of access points. So this is a real-time and live diagram. So not only can I see how everything is interconnected, I don't have to update it. I can click straight into a device from this page. And I can also click on alerting and actually follow the darker lines down to a switch that is alerting. So here on this one, for example, the power supply is offline. And so it allows me to understand what's going on, where the switch is, and how to fix it. Do you design the topology, or is it done automatically by Meraki? It's done automatically, so you don't need to do anything. You simply plug your switches in, and it's going to show you exactly how they're all interconnected. All right, so how much power do they consume? Great question. Let's come over here to the summary report, and I'm going to look at the summary report for our switches. And one of the things that you're able to see there is actual power rate over time, as well as the top switches by power usage. So you can see very quickly that power consumption. Can these devices alert? And if so, can they be ingested into Splunk? Yes and yes. So over here under network wide, you can come over to alerts. And when we click into alerts here, we can see all the different settings that you can set up on a network level. And then if we scroll down here to a switch level, so if a switch goes offline, or if a port, so you can actually tag ports. Remember, like I tagged our ports with access points or VoIP. So if a VoIP port goes down for more than 60 minutes, or whatever the time frame is, I want to be notified. Or if there's a change in link speed, or if an entire switch goes offline, so a warm spare fails over. Great question there. All right, I'm going to hit pause just for a minute on the questions, just to go through another troubleshooting scenario, and then I'll come right back to this. So the next troubleshooting scenario is identifying and locating switch ports with ease. So finding where an Ethernet wall jack terminates and which switch port it connects to can sometimes be a terrible, awful, grueling task. So you might have to trace a cable by hand. You might have to use a cable tracer, read through lots of different MAC address tables. With Meraki, it's quite simple to do. So what we're going to do over here is come over to switch and click on that switches list. Now, on our San Francisco network, there's a lot more switches than just the 4 that we were talking about. But I can click into one of these switches here. Let's just click onto this one now. And what I'm going to do is come over to that Tools tab. If you remember correctly, when I was giving the demonstration on the Meraki network that we just created with me on the 4 switches, I mentioned a Tools tab. Now, here with Tools, you can select a wide variety of different tools. So one of them is being able to ping. Another thing that you can do is blink the LED. So if you do have to change a cable on a device, you can send somebody, I can call up somebody on a remote site and say, hey, cable number 5 or port number 5 is bad on this switch. Can you go replace it? Well, if you have more than one switch, there's always going to be that question in your mind of, is this the right switch that I'm about to unplug this cable from, and am I going to cause a whole lot of disruption? Well, one of the tools is called blink LEDs. So I can click on run, and it's going to blink every single LED on the faceplate of my switch so that I know which switch is the one that I need to replace that cable on. But how do you know if a cable is bad? So that's what we were talking about just now, is cable testing, right? So I'm just going to click back over here. So ports 27 through 30 are all in use. So I'm going to change this to cable test and say, show me the status on cables 26 through 30. It's going to run an electric current down those cables and report back to me the overall length, the link speed, and the status of each of the twisted pairs within that cable. So what you can do here is see and make sure that everything is up and running just fine. You can also wake clients from a deep sleep. You can cycle ports. So that's also really handy, and that's actually one of our troubleshooting scenarios. I think it might be, just going to skip one. It's this troubleshooting scenario, rebooting unmanaged PoE devices. So for example, if you have a VoIP phone and you need to reboot it, which can sometimes be part of basic troubleshooting or maybe to force a configuration update, well, you can do that by cycling the port. You can also come over here to ports and actually click in to one of these. So let's click configure these switches on this port. And what you're able to do now is actually enable or disable on a per port basis. So let's just jump over here. Let's jump back a page, sorry. What we're able to do is click into one of these ports and say, I want to disable this port, click on update, and then click on enable and update it again. So you can cycle the port or you can do that. Now another troubleshooting scenario we have here is finding troublemakers on the network. So what you can do very easily is set up a lot of different rules on how your network is utilized. And one of the really great things, if we come back up here to that network-wide clients page, and I'm just going to change this, instead of looking at all clients, only look at switch clients. And what we're able to do is see over the last day the bandwidth usage, as well as different applications that are contributing to that bandwidth usage. So for example, I can click on more, sort this list based on usage, and start seeing what are the top applications that are used. YouTube is up here really high, and we don't really use YouTube that much. Spotify, again, really high. It's higher even than Salesforce, which is something we use daily. So I can then go in here and start understanding which client themselves are actually potentially abusing their privileges. So here, this top one here is using 16.5% of the overall rule. I can click into this client, find out more details about that client, and even block them from the network. And so what I can do here is say something to the effect of CAT, network abuse, or whatever the case is. And they're going to have to come speak with me, because the next time they try and access the network, they're going to see this splash page pop up with that note telling them to come see me. And then we can also come over here and look at Spotify and see the same thing. You know what? There's another user that's potentially abusing their privileges. And if it's not one user, maybe it's a whole host of users, and you can set up traffic shaping rules. So you don't necessarily block users from the network. You're simply limiting the amount of bandwidth that they have available. All right, and then the last troubleshooting scenario here that I want to quickly cover is reporting usage of printers that are not working. So if I jump back here to that client page, we were taking a look at application usage, but what if I want to take a look at printers? So I can type in printer, for example, and very quickly see all the printers we have in our network. And once again, click in. Somebody was on a Harry Potter binge when they named this printer. I'm not the only weird one that names things after, movies or breakfast items. But named this printer Basilisk, and we can start seeing more information about it. Maybe this device had been offline, and you can very quickly see what's going on here. Now, one thing that's actually quite clever is, let's say that this says that it's online. This printer says it's online, but people still cannot print to it. Well, that's a bit of a bummer, isn't it? Well, you can call up the office and say, all right, tell me what's going on here. Where is the printer? And someone can say, oh, you know what? Last week, we reorganized the office. The printer was just in the wrong area. It messed with the feng shui. So we actually moved it from the east wall to the north wall and plugged it into the port over there. Well, you're sitting here going, okay, let me jump back to that switch then. What's plugged into the port on, or what configuration does the port on the north wall have? So let me click into this switch now. Go over here to our switch ports and say, you know what, that north wall, I know that that one is actually port number 8. And that's set up for a voice client, not for a printer. So I can click into this one and come in here and edit that configuration, change the voice VLAN, remove the voice VLAN, add a different VLAN that's for the printer. Maybe it should be, instead of VLAN 110, maybe it should be VLAN 60, and remove that voice VLAN, hit save, job done. And so what the issue could have been was simply that it was plugged into a port that was not configured properly. And instead of asking them to move that printer back, you can simply edit the configuration of the port and move on with your day. Okay, a lot of things that we covered here. Bear with me, I'm going to just answer a few more questions before we wrap everything up. Does a switch in the AP need to have DHCP active, or can this be managed by your router? It can be definitely managed by your router. Sorry, I'm just taking a look at some of the questions for everybody. Can you make a port template and apply it only to certain ports, like for all printers? Absolutely. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, but what you can do is take this and actually just select all of the printer ports here. So for example, if I wanted to search on printer, maybe the better way of doing this is actually searching on a tag. Maybe you tag all of your printers a certain way. So I can search on printer for the tag, and it will respond back to me with all of the switch ports that are tagged as printer, and then I can edit them in aggregate and actually apply the same port configuration across all of those different printers. So that's a really simple thing to do. So we have 20 switch ports that are tagged as printer, and I can simply click that and hit edit, and that's it. It's as simple as it is. Does it support LODP? Yes, it does. Do version updates happen like access points? I am so happy you've asked that question. I'm going to switch over to our PowerPoint, and bear with me, I'm just going to hijack through a few of these slides. I'll come back to them, don't worry. Do version updates happen like APs? Yes, they do. So one thing that we're actually quite proud of here at Meraki is the feature velocity that we have. Now, one of the things that we see on the screen right now is just a handful of some of the features that we've released over the years. Now, I was here when we first launched our very first switch all the way up until now, and I can tell you that they have changed drastically in terms of the feature set. But the really awesome thing about it, and actually case in point right now, is the demo that I gave you on adding switches. Those are switches that we no longer sell anymore. But they still have all of the features that you need and that are available. So let's say you hypothetically purchase a device today, and then tomorrow or next week release a groundbreaking new feature, all hypothetically. You're not going to miss out. Instead, what'll happen is you'll receive a notification in your dashboard, in your email, etc., letting you know that there's an update available. What you can do is you can either schedule that specific update to happen at a certain time on a one-off basis, or you can simply schedule a port upgrade window, or sorry, a device upgrade window. And so that you know that all of your updates are going to happen between midnight and 2 in the morning on Sunday, for example. And that's as easy as it is. So let me give you a quick analogy here. I have a smartphone. It happens to be an Android phone, but the concept remains the same for other devices. And about 2 weeks ago, my device let me know that I had a system update available and asked if I wanted to schedule it, and I said sure. And when it finished updating, I looked at my phone, and shockingly, my phone was still a phone. It hadn't changed into a Formula One race car. You know, one can always hope. But the phone was still a phone. But when I turned the screen on, I realized that there were features there that I never had before, which was quite exciting. And then there were other features that I had which had been made better. They'd been optimized. And essentially what happened is that I got a brand new phone. Granted, the hardware was still the same, but all of the features and the functionalities of the phone had essentially changed and evolved and become better. And so my phone is actually increasing in value as time goes on, rather than depreciating in value as time goes on. And that concept is exactly true, and the same here with the Meraki devices. So your devices will actually become more and more powerful and more feature-rich as time goes on. And all of that is part of the license. Now, before you run screaming in another direction, hear me out on this license. Your license includes 4 main things. It includes a few other ones, but I like to group it into 4 main categories. The first category is the access to this dashboard, so you can remotely monitor, manage, configure, and have full visibility into your network. The second main thing that you get is a warranty. It's a lifetime warranty on the switches. The third thing that you get is access to 24/7 dedicated Meraki support. So no matter what time of day or night you call in with a question, with a query, maybe you just want to have a chat because why not, you're going to be talking to one of our Meraki sales engineers, network engineers, who are here to help you from beginning all the way to end. They sit in our Sydney and our London and our San Francisco offices, so it's not a call center. You're going to be talking to real-life people. They sit about 10 feet away from me here in our London office, and they are extraordinarily talented. And like I said, we'll hear you out and help you from beginning all the way to end. And then the last thing that license gives you is access to all these future firmware updates and all future feature releases at no additional cost. That's the beauty of it. There's no different tiers of licenses for the switches. It's just one license, and you get everything. All right, let's jump back through some slides here because there's a couple things that I want to highlight. First, you have integrated event logs, alerts, and anomaly detection, so you can instantly have visibility into what's going on, not just on a reactive level, but on a proactive level. So before anybody makes a complaint and says, oh, this doesn't work, you can go in and say, I fixed it. And someone can say, you fixed what? And you can say, exactly. You didn't even know it was a problem. And so it's a really great thing to actually be able to understand what's going on with your network. Like I said at the beginning of this webinar, your switch should do so much more than just switch. At the end of the day, it really can add a lot of business value to your overall network. And the other really cool thing about this type of technology, the fact that it's a cloud-managed IT situation, is that we're essentially giving you back days or weeks of your time, as well as a whole lot of cost, because if you can log into this dashboard and see what's going on, that means that you don't have to hire somebody to go on site to configure something or to check on something. We actually ran a survey and found that over a 3-year period, you're actually able to save about 25 weeks worth of IT time and about $180,000 worth of costs with the Meraki solution. So it's no small gain that you have. The next thing I want to talk about here is advanced network-wide security. So we talked about the access policies already. You also have the ability to set up ACLs and to whitelist certain devices. You can also set up the port schedules like we talked about, the monitoring and the alerts. And you also have per port monitoring and the rogue DHCP server containment. And one thing I did not mention as well, if I jump back here to the network-wide side, is under administration, you have the ability to do role-based administration. So if you have a lot of different network admins, you don't have to give them full access to your entire network. You can simply say, I want you to have read-only access. I want you to have a contractor access. Maybe you're in an area where you need to issue temporary passkeys to the network. You can have that person be a guest ambassador. If you're in education, you can give teachers access levels to different parts of the network as well. And then avoiding client downtime and disruption. So here we have the failover that I mentioned, so immediate failover if the device should go offline. No need to reconfigure other network devices. It simply just keeps on working and alerts you. We also have the graphical UI that reduces a lot of opportunity for errors. So you can simply go in there and make a change and know that you've done it right. And then we also have multiple DHCP relay definitions, DHCP snooping, and again, that seamless transition to a warm, spare, and failover mode. And the other interesting thing that I mentioned about actually deploying to a large set of areas. So we have a customer here in Europe. They're a retail customer. They have about 12,000 sites. And what they realized is that each of their sites fell into what they called a small, medium, or large size deployment. And so they configured a small, medium, and a large size network and then saved it as a template. And then what they were able to do is ship devices out to each of those sites and simply get the serial numbers and add them to the network, the dashboard here, and say, great, this cluster of devices, we're adding you to this small template. And they could click into one of these templates and actually bind devices and bind networks to a template. And then they didn't have to go through and configure 12,000 sites. They simply had to configure 3. And that was the simple part of it. And the other really cool thing is if they need to go back and make a security update later, they simply go back and make it 3 times rather than 12,000 times. And then the last thing I want to talk about really quickly here is the fact that with this being a cloud-based solution, a lot of issues have come up in the last few years about hackers or about vulnerabilities in the network. Well, if there is a vulnerability or if there is a hack to the network, Meraki engineers are often some of the first ones to find a solution, and they can actually deliver it natively to your devices without you having to do anything. So you don't have to wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night going, oh my God, did WannaCry affect my network? Instead, you can sit back, relax, and just know that your site's protected. All right, a few more things. Flexible stacking options, I promise you I'll get back to the questions. You can either have standalone switches, as I mentioned. You can have physically stacked switches, and you can configure switches either all together, separately, or even do virtual stacking where you have different ports on different switches, essentially acting as one single entity rather than multiple ports on multiple switches. We've talked a lot about this already, but a quick highlight. Why are we seeing so many customers moving towards cloud IT, especially our switches? First is that centralized management. So it's incredibly simple to visualize and manage your entire network. You have a lot of live tools like packet capture, diagnostics. We also have a single pane of glass visibility. So one dashboard, that's it. You understand that one dashboard, you can configure your entire network and monitor it. We also have the seamless updates. and that industry-leading visibility into and the ability to see exactly what's going on in your entire network. So whether you have a small deployment or a large multi-site or multinational deployment, you can take these switches and put them and install them in any different types of groupings that work best for you, whether it's a bunch of access switches at a branch office or whether it's a mixture of aggregation and access switches and other switches acting as VPN concentrators for large campus deployments. This is our portfolio. So these are the part of our access portfolio. We have the compact device, which is the one you're getting today, the 8-port PoE switch. We have the branch deployment as well as the larger branch or campus deployment, and we can see here that the different options are simply changing depending on what devices you're looking at. Then we go up a couple levels here and we have more branch and campus access level switches. Again, different features and functionalities depending on the type of switch that you're getting there. And then we have the aggregation switches for both the small and medium-sized campus as well as the medium to large-sized campus. And do keep in mind, we are having a lot of other devices on offer. So you do not need to have a full Meraki deployment. You can just have Meraki switches, for example, and then other vendors' devices. I would love you a little bit more if you had more devices of Merakis, obviously, but you definitely don't need to. But just a really quick reminder, the different devices that we have are the access points, the security appliances, the Ethernet switches, enterprise mobility management, communications, and security cameras, all managed by the exact same platform. So what are next steps? We offer free trials on every single device that we have, and we'll ship for free anywhere in the EU. So we'll ship to you and also provide you return shipping for free back to us. So there's no risk whatsoever. Just let us know what you'd like to try. We have a lot of information on our blog as well as on our website. And then to get that free switch, I mentioned this at the beginning of today's session, we do need to confirm your shipping information in order to get that device to you, because we want to make sure we're shipping it to you and not to a random street corner somewhere. So your representative's contact details are in the reminder email for today's webinar, or you can go to meraki.cisco.com/contact. Either way is just fine, but you do need to confirm your shipping information with your Meraki representative. All right, we have just a couple minutes left here, about 1 minute actually, and I will be forwarding all of these questions onto your Meraki representatives. So if I didn't answer them for whatever reason, excuse me, then if I didn't answer it, we will send it to your representative, and they can answer those questions for you. Do you need to configure anything to plug this switch into an additional any other switch? Nope. Just plug right in. It should work just fine for you guys. If you want a copy of this presentation, just let your representative know. We'd be more than happy to send it to you. I'm also recording today's session so we can get that up for you as well. Are there free trials on the cameras? Absolutely. How do you get a hold of your rep? You can find their contact details in the reminder email for today's webinar, or you can reach out to your Meraki representative. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and for the attention. It made this webinar a lot more entertaining. So thank you again, and I hope everyone here has a wonderful rest of your day.